Welcome to Voices in Action, a new podcast by the Eastern Oregon Center for Independent Living about disability in Oregon. I'm your host, Leo Alenak. Over the course of this first season, we'll cover a variety of topics related to disability justice education, speak with leaders of local advocacy organizations, and learn from one another in the process. This week, we'll be discussing environmental justice and Indigenous spirituality with Elderberry Wisdom Farm founder Rose Highbear. Her bio on the Elderberry Wisdom Farm website reads as such, quote, Rose Highbear, Degaton Dine and Inupiat, was born and raised in a remote subarctic Athabascan village of McGrath on Alaska's Kuskokwim River. Following graduation from Oregon State University, she co-founded Wisdom of the Elders Incorporated, Wisdom in Portland, Oregon, 1993. For 26 years, she dedicated herself as executive director to Wisdom's mission while developing many programs and multimedia learning models dedicated to Native cultural sustainability, health and wellness, and habitat restoration. Rose retired in 2019 to rural Marion County, where she founded Elderberry Wisdom Farm. She upholds its mission by providing an abundance of resources for Native community development in the greater Salem area and far beyond. Rose is the current board president, end quote.
Well, hello, friends and relatives. My name is Rose Highbear, and I am Degaton Dine from Alaska. It's about one of the bands of Athabascan people of Alaska, and also I have some Inupiat blood. And so I greet you here from the central Willamette Valley, just south of Salem. I have a 2-acre farm down here. And so I'm just happy to join you today.
So you say you grew up in Alaska, and I know that you studied at OSU. What made you choose Marion County as a place to grow this farm?
Well, I didn't really choose it. I worked for 30 years in Portland, co-founding another Native American nonprofit. And the spirit world told me to move out of the city. So that was around 2016. It was maybe 5 years ago. And so 4 years ago, I moved and was looking for a place. They told me to find a place where I could start an intentional Native American farm community where Native Americans could live in a place where they felt comfortable, where the values were comparable to theirs. You know, we have these cultural values of respect and honor, and we've not always been honored as Native American people. We're trying to create a space where people can perhaps farm or earn a living on the land somehow and live their Native American cultural values and spirituality. And so I found this home and have been blessed to be living here. And there's a neighbor who sold the property right in back of me, a 17-acre forest, which I just am in the process of purchasing right now. I was afraid that a monoculture might come in. I didn't want, Christmas tree farms and vineyards. Monoculture does do too much damage to the soil. And so I was able to purchase that, and I've got, the next year to figure out how to fund, that purchase. But we're planning to put in a native plant nursery on that property. And at the same time, I was gifted an 11-acre plot around Aurora, which is also in Marion County. And it's around Aurora Donald area, 11 acres of irrigated land, which is organic and with the wonderful woodburn silt soil. And so we're planning on putting together an intentional community of Native American farmers. And so we'd have to find or provide housing for them. But they would have farmland there. And so I was simply told to move out of the city, and I'm kind of glad I did. I don't think I'm a city girl anymore.
So what is Elderberry Wisdom Farm?
Well, it is actually a Native American nonprofit that I formed 3 years ago. And we formed it for the purpose of training Native American people in horticulture or agricultural fields so they could earn their living working on the land. It's much more healing for people to work on the land than it is to work, around people, I guess you could say. And so working on the land has healing qualities. And so the nonprofit is designed to train people, whether it be workforce training, internships, development of micro enterprises in agriculture or horticultural fields, so they can develop their own businesses. And so our training, we've been doing culturally tailored multimedia curriculum for a long time. And so we've produced health and wellness curriculum in the past, and also ecology, what we call STEAM, which is a STEM training, but it adds cultural arts. So it's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And so we have been for over a decade developing a learning model that's compatible with Native Americans. And it's more experiential. It's more of a family setting because, our old traditional way of raising our children is the grandchildren are sitting at the feet of their grandparents and also learning out in the world of nature. And so the idea of learning in a classroom, in a book, is kind of foreign and it's challenging at times, although we really believe in Western science. For the traditional ecological knowledge work that we do, it has to be balanced with our own Native American cultural values and our traditions, our philosophy, our oral history, and the culture especially, because we include a lot of music, dance, storytelling, and other cultural arts in our work. And we include a lot of multimedia. So basically, Elderberry Wisdom Farm was formed for the purpose of helping other Native American people. We're very underrepresented in the world and frequently have low incomes. Our family has low incomes. We have a lot of health and wellness issues. Our educational engagement is, less than others, and the educational academic achievement is also lower. So we're trying to turn that all around, because we find Native people to be absolutely brilliant people and wonderful, good-hearted people. And so we just work with them to develop their own career pathway plan so they can achieve in life.
So what is the Traditional Ecological Knowledge Workforce Project?
Well, that's what we're doing right now. Right now, we have a team of Native American interns, and they're learning to restore the land using Indigenous principles and cultural values. So one thing we never do is we never poison the land with sprays. So we do habitat restoration that's very old-fashioned and natural by removing invasives and planting natives. And so we use only those things that are not toxic to the soil. And right now we're developing an elderberry patch outside, and the interns are all learning how to tend the elderberries. We just weeded out there, and we just planted a few natives. We put in a cover crop of red clover because it's going to build the nitrogen in the soil. We just evaluated our soil here and found out that it's very high quality, because we don't rake and remove the oak leaves. All the oak leaves put all their beautiful power back into the earth. So our soil is very rich here. It's perfect for native plants. It may not be as good for agricultural products, however, because we have a heavier clay. So we have Jory soil, which is very common here. And a lot of people that have vineyards love the Jory soil. It seems to really work for their wine crops. And then we also have a soil called Willackenzie, which I believe would be something coming from the Willamette and the Mackenzie rivers. And so those are the kind of soils we have. They're very rich in mineral. They're slightly acidic. And I'm not a scientist, so I can't tell you much more than that. But it really impressed our OSU people that got a chance to look at our tests. So we were happy. But right now we're looking through the elderberry patch. We have 20 plants that we planted a couple of years ago, and then we're putting in another 50 this fall. We're also planning to plant some up in where we're at up in Aurora to see if that soil might be have a better yield for the blue elderberries, because we're planning on doing a line of elderberry syrup that comes from the native blue elderberry, locally sourced, organic, And so where I'm using that as a model. I'm really not interested in owning a company like that, but what I'm interested in is creating a model that our students can learn from. So they're all learning how to form their own business by looking at how I'm putting together the Blue Elderberry Farm products. That may be the model that we use. That may be the label that we use.
What's the specific reason for elderberries specifically as your choice of plant?
Yeah, so the elderberry is it's really good for the immune system. If you want to protect yourself from bacteria, viruses, whatever's going around, and, it is serious during this pandemic, you can increase your immune system substantially by using elderberries. So we make an elderberry syrup, and, the elderberries themselves have a little bit of toxicity in them, but as soon as you cook them, that goes away. So they're very safe. They're very good for your body. And if you're not feeling well or starting to come down with a cold or the flu, you can take it. It will minimize the impact. You can recover your health faster.
And you mentioned interns too. Are these students of a particular age, or do they come from all walks of life?
Well, we try never to put anybody in boxes, so they can be any age. Right now, our interns are all under 30, so we have younger people. One is just about ready to graduate from college, though. So she's a Navajo woman, and she's been studying with us. She just has one more term before she gets her bachelor's degree in environmental science. So she came to our internship in order to see what it's like to be in a native setting, a native academic setting. And she really likes the fact that it's strengthening her, native perspective on things. Not all Native people are raised traditionally in their own reservations anymore. So, over half of the Native people in America have moved off of the reservation and are living in urban areas. Some of them are not aware of their heritage. So she's been enjoying it. The other two students are from a local family, and they're also Navajo. And then we have a woman who's Blackfoot, plus a couple of other tribes. So those are our 4 interns right now. They're getting a lot of personal attention, and we're just now in the middle of developing our model. And so the interns are, part of our experiment of how do we make this really pop? How do we make our lesson plans really engaging? And we have a specific way we do our lesson plans. They're very experiential. We always have videos in them. We always have talking circles so that everybody participates. And I've noticed that students who are in the dominant society academic settings, they're just used to sitting in a classroom and quietly listening. And we don't do that. We engage them and we get their opinion on things, we get their feedback, and we give them homework assignments so they can contribute to the class. So I think that's a little bit different. And I think when you have a higher engagement in activity, it strengthens their communication skills. So they're already noticing that some of the different workforce factors, we are sometimes behind on our workforce readiness. Some of those factors are being increased, such as oral communication, verbal communication. The other workforce readiness factors have to do with Native American leadership. Understanding truly what Native American leadership is, because again, it's different. So we're just different, that's all.
Well, and I'd imagine too, as you mentioned, because of historical displacement, you're also working with a lot of people who don't come from tribes in Oregon, right? So it's a lot of, I don't know, cultural differences, if that's like the right terminology to use, but how does that get incorporated?
Yeah, so it's diversity. So we have over 570 something federally recognized tribes. Many more have not been recognized. Many are unrecognized. They tried to terminate most of the tribes. The government wanted to save money, after they got our land. They tried to figure out how to reduce the debt that they were covering. They never properly covered. But anyway, we wound up, being, I forgot now what your question was. I got so carried away. What was your question again with regard to that? I don't want to get off topic.
No, it's totally fine. If you want to get off topic at any point, that's totally fine. But I just basically was just bringing up the fact that I'd imagine there's also a lot of different conversations about incorporating the knowledge from different tribes and different people from different tribes coming in because they're not necessarily from Oregon tribal communities.
Yeah. So then what we're dealing with here is a lot of diversity with 570 tribes. We have a tremendous amount of cultural diversity, and everybody thinks there's a Native American philosophy, Native American oral history, but it's very diverse. I mean, I've probably recorded 450, maybe 500 Native elders by now over all these decades. And, it's just a very small drop in the bucket. There's just an awful lot. Everyone you record has their own story. They have their own background. They come from a different part of the country. Their spiritual philosophy is slightly different. The way of working with the earth is different. The foods that they ate traditionally are different. So we do deal with a lot of diversity. So what we do with the classes is we're talking about traditional ecological knowledge, and we try to focus it on the Willamette Valley because that's where they're doing the internship. But most of these people are from outside the valley. But the teachings remain the same. They can still understand how this relates to them, even if their ancestral, location is different.
So then speaking of cultural differences, what does cultural preservation look like to you and why is it important?
These days, they kind of call cultural preservation, they call it cultural sustainability. But I really like the word cultural preservation because I think sustainability is overused and they frequently think of something different. But we're trying to preserve the wisdom and knowledge of our elders and ancestors by recording them. And so we try to do that as much as we can. We formed a Native American Storytelling Association back in 2004. We were funded for 11 years by National Endowment for the Arts and others, Oregon Cultural Trust and others believed in us and funded us. And so we put on a series of Native American storytelling festivals. We had emerging storytelling workshops because we wanted our Native people to learn their own stories, their own creation stories. journey stories, and including oral histories. But there's a lot of animal stories, trickster stories, and just a wide variety of Native stories. And we wanted people to start picking them up and telling them again, because that's how a lot of our children were taught, was through stories. The cultural values are ingrained in them, kind of like a backbone of the story is the rich values that we have of respect and honor toward one another in the world of nature.
So are these stories, and I know in your bio, there was also a mention of the American Indian Oral History Collection and Wisdom of the Elders radio program. Is that a resource that's open for non-Indigenous people to listen to and learn from, or is that something that's closed off and very much an inter-community resource?
Well, some of them we had legal releases and people signed it and we said we would not share it unless they gave permission. But many of it, whatever's on the radio program, I believe my old nonprofit still has, 3 or 4 series of radio programs so you can listen to the audio. And the way that I set it up back decades ago is it had transcripts on it and photography and links and things like that. I don't know to what extent it's been kept up, but it's called Wisdom of the Elders radio program. So there is a lot of rich, highly produced, NPR quality stories with broadcast quality audio. And so we also had the Discovering Our Story television series that we did monthly up in Portland. And I think that they stopped that about a year ago. It could be the pandemic made it too difficult to go into the TV studios, but we were doing monthly television programs, an hour in length. We were featuring issues in the community and highlighting elders and other community leaders, and they could come in and talk about their programs. And we'd engage in different dialogues about different things. Bill Ray is a Klamath Indian who did a great job of being our host for those programs. And I think we'd carried it on for a few years. So I enjoyed that. I was co-host with him at times when I had time to join him. And, it was a rich and rewarding experience. And then another thing, the Oral History Project was something we did in 1999 and 2000. I was meant to do the life story of my late husband, the medicine man and spiritual leader, Martin Highberry's Lakota from Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. And so I was told I would be doing his story of his life and sharing that with the people of the world. I was told to do that by the spirit world. And what he proposed instead is that we buy a video camera and start recording people. So after I lost him, he died in 1995 after all the giveaways and the year of grieving and all that. I was able to fund a small oral history project and went back to North and South Dakota. His mother's side of his family came from Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, and his father was from Hunkpapa people of Standing Rock Indian Reservation in North Dakota. So I went out there for 2 years in a row. We probably recorded about 40 people, and I believe that that's still available, perhaps through Sitting Bull College. I didn't track it, and they did try to reach me a few years ago and ask me what my role was in it. But they do have those recordings. We put them on a Betacam SP format to save them, for perpetuity's sake. And so they're still available, and mostly about Lakota people. But I've recorded a lot of other people from other nations, especially when we started working on the radio program. And then when we got into the television program, it was more of the local Native American community.
So jumping back then to the farm work, how can Oregon farmers, especially small ones, learn from your work and the work of the Elderberry Wisdom Farm, or change their models to be more sustainable?
Well, I don't know if they're interested or not. Most people, farmers are farmers and they're going to do what they do, and profitability is important. Now, to Native people, we just love working on the land. We love providing food for our families. We love not starving. And we love having our food be very high quality. So we're really into restoring the soil. Much of the soil throughout the world is degraded, heavily degraded in some cases. Some of it's toxic, from air pollution, soil pollution, water pollution. And so, one of the things that's important to me is that we always treasure the land and the soil from which our food comes from. And I think that almost every farmer in Oregon in the Willamette Valley would agree with me there, that is important to them. We don't really believe in putting in fertilizers, for instance. So we believe in restoring the soil by keeping no-till, cover crops, having a diverse planting, because we don't believe in monocrops.
In the book, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, Beyond the Nonprofit Industrial Complex, a chapter by Christine E. Ahn, gives just one example of the dangers of imperialist agricultural models. Quote, right-wing foundations are not alone in strategically directing funds to achieve their goals. Liberal foundations are just as culpable as their right-wing counterparts in advancing a seemingly pragmatic agenda with tremendous effects on societies and the environment. In what is perceived as the single largest and longest-lasting initiative of American philanthropy, the Rockefeller Foundation, and later the Ford Foundation, bankrolled the massive global restructuring of agriculture known as the Green Revolution. The ostensible goal was to end world hunger by transferring Western scientific agricultural techniques to less developed countries to increase crop yields. In just 50 years, the Green Revolution increased food production substantially, but it also permanently transformed agriculture and destroyed the livelihoods of millions of farmers and villages that had been in existence for hundreds of years. Although the stated intention of the officers, trustees, and scientists of the Rockefeller Foundation was to solve the seemingly intractable problem of global hunger, investigative journalist Mark Dowie presents a parallel story of elites that were just as motivated to curb population growth in the global South and stave off radical communist insurgency. The Green Revolution was seeded in 1941 in Mexico, which was a fertile place and time for a Rockefeller-funded agricultural science project. Mexico had a new president, Avilo Camacho, who was pro-U.S. and favored private property rights. Although private land ownership and free market principles replaced former President Lázaro Cárdenas's socialist policies, including large-scale land reform, the political instability in Mexico and the region caused by massive food shortages continued to concern the Rockefeller Foundation. Dowie writes, quote, throughout the region, the Rockefeller family's massive investments made them vulnerable to the kind of instability that results from a hungry populace. End quote. In other words, a program to end hunger was wielded as a tool to suppress a communist revolt. By 1943, researchers in the Rockefeller Foundation's Mexican agriculture program were teaching Mexican and other Latin American agronomists techniques to grow massive quantities of food by employing the tools of the Green Revolution: pesticides, fertilizers, and other ecologically damaging techniques. While the funders promoted their agenda as a humanitarian effort, the Rockefeller Foundation archives show that Cold War geopolitics and the fear of population growth motivated the trustees at least as much as feeding the masses. Mexico and India, which were enduring political instability and burgeoning populations, were primed for a mass communist insurgency. The Malthusian philosophy that overpopulation caused hunger was the prevailing belief among elites at that time, and was the underlying ideology that drove foundations to promote the Green Revolution. The International Development Advisory Board, IDAB, chaired by Nelson Rockefeller, recommended that IDAB cooperate with countries like Mexico and India in, quote, a vigorous food production drive that would break the back of famine and hunger, end quote, and thereby stabilize their governments. This ignored the fact that poverty was often the result of tightly concentrated economic power that limited people's access to land and purchasing power. The Green Revolution did produce record-breaking amounts of food, but with tremendous ecological and social consequences, such as the depletion of soils around the world with the application of pesticides, fertilizers, and the massive displacement of subsistence farmers that accompanied the industrialization of agriculture. As Dowie notes, 30 years ago, when the Green Revolution was still germinating, there were fewer than 1 million hungry people on the planet. The Green Revolution may have yielded extremely productive quantities of food, but the fact that over 800 million people around the world face hunger daily amid overabundant food supplies can hardly be considered a victory. Although the Green Revolution was largely promoted and financed by governments, private foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation played a pivotal role in advancing technological solutions to problems that threatened elite control: political insurgency and population growth. End quote.
Monoculture degrades and ruins the soil. You can see that in Oregon's forests, where they just planted only Douglas fir. And so, decades later, what you're finding out is the foresters are going, well, why is the Douglas fir not producing? Why are the needles falling from the trees? Why did the growth slow? Well, they only planted Douglas fir. Why didn't they put the Pacific madrona back? Why didn't they put the Pacific yew back and all the underbrushes? They didn't realize that that's a community, a living community, just like our own personal families, just like our farmer families. So, I'm not quite talking about farmers here at this point, but the forestry industry looked at it as a profit-making venture, and in the process, They didn't talk to Native people. How was it when our new neighbors came to Oregon territory that they didn't talk to the Indians and ask them how they kept it so pristine? They looked at us as aliens. They thought that we were evil. They tried to massacre us. And so they didn't speak our language. They weren't interested. They were just interested in getting us out of the way so they could settle.
The concept of this land being unused by Indigenous peoples, and therefore something that settlers deserve to take, is the rationale that was used to justify genocide, as well as a model of production that has and continues to destroy the planet. As Rose explains, Indigenous people have deep cultural ties to the land, whereas European culture and capitalism demanded that land be turned into property to be destroyed for the sake of profit. A 2016 article published by The Atlantic and written by Kelly Mosteller expands on how the Western notion of land is still a problem. Quote, "Thousands of Native American protesters are currently fighting against the proposed construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota. They are doing more than just trying to protect their land. They are fighting for their culture. And, as the Ojibwe activist Winona LaDuke argues, their future. Advances on Indian lands have always been and continue to be attacks on Indigenous values. Non-tribal governments and corporations with interests in tribal land have not slowed such attacks in recent years, but members of Indigenous communities throughout the United States have rallied new resistance. Some, like the Standing Rock Sioux in North Dakota, are challenging corporate incursions on their treaty lands and water. Others are fighting something slightly more subtle, renewed calls to change the ownership structure of native lands. Conflicts over the use and ownership of native lands are not new. Land has been at the center of virtually every significant interaction between natives and non-natives since the earliest days of European contact with the indigenous peoples of North America. By the 19th century, federal Indian land policies divided communal lands among individual tribal members in a proposed attempt to make them into farmers. The result instead was that struggling tribes were further dispossessed of their land. In recent decades, tribes, corporations, and the federal government have fought over control of native land and resources in contentious protests and legal actions, including the Oak Flat, the San Francisco Peaks controversy, and the Keystone XL pipeline. For most Americans, land is money and land ownership constitutes power. For individuals who are not familiar with tribal cultures and histories, it is easy to assume that the ability to make money off of land by leasing it to extractive industries or selling it off is a natural path to personal success and therefore prosperity for the community at large. Make no mistake, for Native people, a link exists between land ownership and success, but it is much more complex and intimate than the personal ability to exploit or sell land for financial gain. Not all communities are facing the same kind of crises, but almost all recognize the importance of land to cultural preservation. Whether in our ancestral homelands, such as those where the Lakota have stopped the construction of the pipeline, or in areas of Oklahoma, where more than 24 tribes were forcefully placed during the 19th century, protecting our tribal land bases is an intrinsic part of the formula that will lead to greater prosperity and success for individuals and tribes in Indian country. That is the reason why protests to defend treaty-protected lands, like the current protests over the Dakota Access Pipeline, are so important. It is also the reason why thousands of Native people, representing scores of tribes, have made the journey to North Dakota to protest the pipeline that threatens both sites that are sacred to the Sioux people and the drinking water for those living on the nearby reservation. They are there to speak for their ancestors who are buried on those sites. They are there to speak for themselves and their right to preserve their ceremonial sites and drinking water. And they are there to speak for the subsequent generations that will have to live with the results of the pipeline's construction. Proponents of privatization, be they corporations or well-intentioned free market reformers, are disregarding Indian culture and values. The author Naomi Schaefer Riley, for instance, recently published an article in The Atlantic suggesting that Native American communities suffer from economic devastation and social inequity due to the federal policy of holding Native American lands in trust. Her solution to this policy, which she argues has stymied individual success and contributed to endemic poverty in Native American communities, is the resurrection of a much older, failed solution: the redistribution of lands collectively held by tribes to individuals. Reform-minded authors like Schaefer Riley begin making their case by citing a number of terrifying statistics about poverty on reservations, violence against Native women, and teen suicide rates, among others. All are largely factual. Schaefer Riley's solution, however, creates a false dichotomy, suggesting that success is limited to either the individual or the tribe. She claims that tribal citizens' inability to privately own and therefore capitalize on tribal lands, quote, prevents American Indians from reaping numerous benefits, end quote. This is a narrow interpretation of the resources and policies that would benefit Natives, and it disregards the cultural and spiritual values at the core of Native American tribal societies. This frame of reference also fails to acknowledge that Native communities face the arduous task of overcoming these social challenges as a direct result of centuries of federal policies that disassembled traditional social structures, moved entire communities, and attempted to dismantle tribal sovereignty. Virtually every one of those policies had an end goal of eliminating tribal rights to land and advanced a non-Native understanding of how to properly, quote-unquote, use land. While Schaefer-Riley is correct that social problems persist on some reservations, she neglects to consider that since the passage of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act of 1975 and the Tribal Self-Governance Act of 1944, hundreds of tribes have consistently shown improvement when allowed to manage their own affairs. Self-governance means that tribal governments decide where and how to allocate resources for certain programs, such as healthcare via funding from the Indian Health Service, to meet the needs of their community. Although more needs to be done, the solution proposed by Schaefer-Riley would constitute an assault on tribal lands, not a path to prosperity. On reservation lands, a tribe decides what type of infrastructure its community needs. This can include health clinics, schools, housing for low-income families and elders, cultural centers, and a wide range of enterprises. My own tribe, the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, is the largest employer in Potawatomi County, a relatively rural area of central Oklahoma. We provide jobs to more than 2,400 people, Natives and non-Natives, in our government administration offices and more than 20 businesses. This is only possible because we have tribally owned land on which to develop and operate enterprises. Across Indian country, tribes are often one of the few sources of jobs in areas far from urban centers, and they are increasingly at the forefront of industries like tourism and green energy. Tribes should also be able to determine what constitutes success for themselves, and have recently done so by pursuing policy initiatives that recognize tribal sovereignty on their land, not by focusing on private property rights that would break it apart. In 2012, Congress passed a critical piece of legislation that provides tribes an avenue to greater sovereignty and will lead to more investment and economic development in Indian country. The Helping Expedite and Advance Responsible Tribal Homeownership, HEARTH Act, gives participating tribes the authority to lease reservation or trust land for residential or business purposes without further approval by the federal government. This advancement in self-governance means that tribes are able to determine the housing or commercial projects that are the most needed in their communities, and the best way to utilize their land base. It also means they have more direct control of tribal assets, which makes them better able to shape their own future. Unlike land privatization, the Hearth Act keeps the tribally owned trust or reservation land intact, and therefore does not negate the federal government's trust responsibilities for those properties. Beyond such policies, efforts to help Native Americans gain socioeconomic success should start by looking at what holds specific tribes back from taking advantage of avenues for more self-governance and economic development. Some tribes face daunting challenges that present a barrier to pursuing economic development projects. Instead, they are combating life-threatening social and emotional upheaval rooted in cultural loss as a result of wars, genocide, forced removals, separation from ancestral homelands, children taken away to boarding schools, and other experiences that negatively impacted tribal communities across generations. Brutal federal policies that focused on assimilation pushed Native people to accept a narrow concept of what it means to be a successful American. Recovering, preserving, and teaching Native cultural traditions gives community members direction, purpose, and a sense of identity. It also instills generational wisdom, encourages respect for elders, and reinforces familial responsibilities. Only when a tribe restores its cultural riches can it turn its attention to financial gains. There are ways to address economic and social challenges for Native Americans within a tribal system that don't undermine the fundamental nature of the tribe or destroy the land base necessary to create a strong and thriving community. Native people across the country are steadily making strides toward that goal, and their successes are a testament to the courage and resilience of their communities. We will heal our broken communities from the ground up, not by selling or exploiting the ground beneath our feet." End quote.
And so, unfortunately, the lack of respect for Native people, their philosophy, and their practices in the forest, their practices on the land, were not passed on, including, I'm still watching for the forestry industry to talk about the tradition that Native American had for thousands of years of selective burning. And so we would do field burning, and we did it in a certain way, and it was successful. And when they made it illegal for us to do our burning, they put some people in jail for burning, because they didn't understand. And so, we have a real disconnect that it could reconnect. And I'd be willing to talk to any farmer who wanted to call me. But as it is right now, I'm not sure that people are really interested. Some people don't have an understanding or awareness of Native Americans or their culture. They look at us as the enemy. Some still might regard us as subhuman. We were not regarded as human initially. And so I'm open to anybody. I have a very strong race reconciliation philosophy. And my nonprofit has a strong diversity, equity, and inclusion philosophy that we welcome all people, no matter what color, no matter what, background, no matter what sex, no matter what, anything. And so, we really believe in sharing with all people, mankind is one. And so I'm certainly open to it. And we work very hard to raise awareness and understanding of the richness that we can provide to the world as a relative and as a neighbor. And so in that process, it increases awareness and understanding and respect.
Absolutely. Yeah, you brought up something that I was going to mention, which was the selective burning and how important that process was historically, and how that the criminalization of that tool as a way to prevent such wide-scale forest fires has really led to such harm now. And I'd imagine that, it's kind of this cycle now where so many places are burning down. And then if they're not listening to Indigenous people's input on and knowledge of what to plant in replacement, right? You mentioned that the monoculture, if they're just taking up this empty burned land and then just planting, Christmas trees, it's going to continue that cycle. It's a very strange time to be alive, I guess, is my note, coming from a younger perspective of just seeing all of this, the climate disasters and living through them in so many ways.
You probably know that I produced the Native American climate documentary film series, and we always recorded our people talking about selective burning, and so the cultural burning. And so we included it in on our documentaries, and we tried to make the world aware of it. And we're seeing more of it. And in some of the Native publications, we're seeing the Native perspective on it. But I would like to see our government foresters start to acknowledge Native people for the wisdom and knowledge that they have to provide in that area. I just read a long article yesterday, and I shouldn't have read it because I was disappointed again that it's never mentioned that this was an old cultural tradition of tribes, of Native people. Mm-hmm. And it should have been maintained after first contact, and it was not. And so I would like there to be more acknowledgement. I'm going to stop looking and expecting it, but I think that our people that take care of our land and our waters need to be more respectful toward Native people and be seeking us out more. We have a lot to say. We could really help.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, is a settler government is built to ignore Indigenous knowledge, which is a problem, obviously, but that's the way that it's structured.
And I never want to be critical of the government. I don't believe in criticizing the government. I believe in change, however. And so, you have to influence somebody. People have to be willing to listen. And, we can influence people. The prophecy tells us the day will come when Native people, the people of the earth, will turn to Native people to learn how to care for the earth and to care for one another. And so since that is prophecy, we believe it and we know it's going to happen. And a lot of the work we do is just for fulfilling that.
So you mentioned this documentary on climate justice. Is that online somewhere that people can watch that?
Well, I'm no longer in that nonprofit. I moved, out of Portland 4 or 5 years ago. And so the Native Wisdom documentary film series was, I know that they aired it last November, and it was on OPB Plus, which is the OPB educational channel. So they aired it last year. I don't know if they'll air it this year or not, but I think it is important for us to record our elders, save their messages, and produce documentaries that are engaging, because it seems to be a wonderful educational tool.
So what advice do you have for young climate justice activists?
Well, I think that, I've been giving keynote addresses to youth, to Native youth, and they film me about it. And I always encourage them. I remind them that they are tomorrow's living museums. They're tomorrow's storytellers. They're tomorrow's scientists. And that, I'm embarrassed that we're passing on such a degraded world to them. We rely very heavily on youth to pick up problems that we could not solve ourselves. And so a lot of these young people, are very discouraged, but unfortunately, we have to leave it to our youth. And I think that Native youth, I've been participating in the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians and the National Congress of the American Indian climate youth programs, the climate justice programs for Native youth that they've been holding. And they're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. They're getting their degrees and they're getting their Western science knowledge and they've got their traditional ecological knowledge down. And so I have great trust and faith that they are going to be able to make a difference if the world will listen to them. It has to be a two-way communication. And so I think that what's important is that the hope remains strong. We have to rely on positive. I hear too much negativity and it worries me because it can hurt the spirit of young and more fragile people. So our youth are fragile because they're still young and they're just learning. And we have to make sure that we don't poison them with a negative attitude. So we do have a lot of problems, but there's ways we can communicate it. For instance, the Pacific white oak, the Oregon white oak, the canopies, they're endangered. And, you could say that 85% or 90% of the Oregon white oak have been exterminated, but isn't it better to say we're very grateful that we still have 10 or 15% of the Oregon white oak and that it's growing, people are restoring it. Now, which way do we want to speak if we're going to encourage a climate justice person?
An article by Vox talks about the importance of fighting climate despair. Quote, "Summer 2021 has been a season of disasters. In June, a heat dome descended over the Pacific Northwest, sending temperatures soaring 30 to 40 degrees above normal. It was so hot that plants scorched in the soil, roads cracked, and streetcar cables melted in temperatures that reached over 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, in July, extreme floods ripped through Northwest Europe, leaving at least 199 dead. The same happened in China's Henan province, where subways flooded, roads collapsed, and at least 99 people died. And last week, yet another heat dome swept the U.S., putting 17 states under some form of heat advisory. Through the events of this summer, many Americans, including those from more affluent communities that have been insulated so far, have seen more direct and devastating impacts of climate change on their own lives. For a lot of people, that can come with a sense of despair. What can one person possibly do to save a world literally on fire? Quote, "What happens is, when people first realize how bad it is, they feel powerless." Mary Anais Hegler, a climate writer and co-creator of the podcast Hot Take, told Vox, "With the extreme weather this year, there's a new wave of new people realizing how bad it is." End quote. Indeed, 40% of Americans feel helpless about climate change, and 29% feel hopeless, according to a December 2020 survey. It's also no surprise that these emotions are coming up during a devastating pandemic, yet another global disaster over which individual humans have seemingly little control. To help stop climate change, we've sometimes been told to change our personal habits, recycle, reuse, take shorter showers, etc., but these individual choices are dwarfed by the actions of corporations and countries. Just 100 companies are responsible for 70% of the world's carbon emissions since 1988, according to one study, and sweeping changes aren't possible without government intervention. Not to mention the fact that poverty and other factors constrain the choices many people can make in the first place. Given all this, it's no surprise that, quote, "all of a sudden everyone's going into nihilism," end quote, as Hegler puts it. But experts say we're not completely powerless, and there's a way to live in an age of climate change without giving up or sticking your head in the sand. It's not necessarily about going vegan or making your home zero waste either. The idea of reducing your personal carbon footprint, while not inherently wrong, has often been used as a distraction, quote, "pitting working people against each other with morality choices about how sustainable you are, rather than realizing how much you actually have in common," end quote. John Paul Mejia, a spokesperson for the Sunrise Movement, which mobilizes youth to fight climate change, said, "Instead, many say the key to fighting despair is to think beyond the individual and seek community support and solutions, especially those that put pressure on governments and companies to make the large-scale changes that are necessary to truly curtail emissions." As Hegler put it, quote, "The most detrimental thing to climate action is this feeling that we're all in it alone," end quote. Climate anxiety and despair are far from new phenomena, but this disastrous summer has driven home the message that the changing climate, quote, "is not something we can avoid," end quote. Sarah Jaquette Ray, leader of the Environmental Studies program at Humboldt State University, told Vox, quote, "I'm literally talking to you from the smoke right now," end quote. American attitudes about what to do about climate change are evolving too. Carbon emissions have often been treated as a problem to be solved by changing our personal consumption habits, with an explosion of green products aimed at capitalizing on people's desire to be environmentally friendly. Aside from the irony of getting people to buy more stuff as a way of reducing their environmental impact, this approach also obscured the real culprits, many say: companies that produce or use large amounts of fossil fuels and governments that have been far too slow to curb emissions. Indeed, oil companies like ExxonMobil have used sophisticated PR campaigns to make climate change seem like an issue of personal responsibility and deflect blame away from their own actions, as Rebecca Lieber reported for Vox. Quote, "A lot of the individualist solutions that have propagated across society and across our discourse, such as the carbon footprint and the idea of self-sacrifice in order to save the planet, really have the fingerprints of a few oil companies," end quote, Mejia said. In truth, the biggest contributors to carbon emissions in the United States, transportation, electricity, and industry, are only partly under individuals' control. People can choose to use less energy in their homes, but household electricity use only accounts for about 10% of CO2 emissions in the US. Even getting rid of it entirely wouldn't be enough to stop climate change. And while some people can choose to drive an electric car or go car-free, they can't individually shut down coal plants or redesign America's public transit systems to make that an option for everyone. That's why it will take government action, not just individual sacrifice, to meaningfully rein in emissions. For example, Congress could pass a nationwide clean electricity standard, requiring utilities to get their electricity from renewable sources like solar, rather than fossil fuels. Without that, even supposedly environmentally friendly individual decisions like driving an electric car may not mean much, since that electricity could still come from burning coal. And only governments have the money and authority for the improvements to public transit and other infrastructure that are needed to dramatically reduce emissions over the long term. In recent years, there's been growing awareness of the outsized role that big companies and government entities play in climate change. Quote, "We've really changed the conversation around climate change away from individual action, which I think we really needed to do," Hegler said. However, now we're in danger of the pendulum swinging too far, she said, with people thinking they can't do anything at all, end quote. Giving up on our climate is not an option, experts and advocates say. As Mejia puts it, quote, "Cynicism serves no purpose but to uphold the status quo," end quote. Instead, people who've been steeped in climate action for years or decades have some advice for those who might be feeling powerless today in the face of the problem. Individual green behaviors aren't enough to stop climate change on their own, and not all people have the same ability to reduce their carbon footprints. Many Americans can't afford solar panels or insulation for their hot water heaters. Many others don't live in places where they can control such things. Time is also a factor. Reducing waste in a society designed to produce a lot of it is labor-intensive, and that labor often falls disproportionately on women, as Alden Wicker reported at Vox. So rather than beating ourselves up when we fall short of environmental perfection or criticizing others when they do, we can choose the most meaningful actions that are doable for us. Things like reducing consumption of animal products, driving less, and taking fewer airplane flights likely have the biggest impact on our personal carbon use. Everyone's capabilities are different. Overall, quote, "It's important to find the ways that you can reduce your consumption that work for your lifestyle and within your means," Hegler said. And it's important to remember that those consumption decisions are just the beginning. It's a good starting point, but it's a really dangerous stopping point, end quote. People need to exercise their power as consumers, but remember they have power as citizens and community members too. The most important step, many say, is collective action. In America, quote, "We have such a myth of individualism," end quote, said Humboldt States Ray, also the author of A Field Guide to Climate Change, How to Keep Your Cool on a Warming Planet. That myth can make people feel, quote, that they have no power because they can't do anything against such as something so big as climate change, end quote. For many in climate movements, the antidote to that feeling and the way to build real power is to band together. At the Sunrise Movement, for example, that means advocating for a Green New Deal, alongside other priorities like climate investment in the infrastructure deal currently before Congress. The Sunrise Movement is just one of many groups working on climate advocacy today, and for some, getting involved with collective action can seem as daunting as reducing your individual carbon footprint. Where do you even start? For Hegler, the answer is simple. Quote, "You do what you're good at and you do your best. If you're good at organizing, organize. If you're good at taking care of people, take care of people who do other things. And no matter who you are, build community," end quote. Around the world, people are already working on communal solutions to environmental degradation and have been for generations, whether that's indigenous firefighting practices or the fight to protect the rainforest in Colombia. And for Americans looking for ways to join together to help one another on the planet, there are many options, like local mutual aid groups that help communities cope with the impact of climate change, such as by providing water and sunscreen during heat waves. Local Buy Nothing groups can help people reduce waste by giving away and sharing used items. Putting pressure on elected officials is one of the most important collective actions people can take. People can urge their representatives in Congress, state legislators, and city governments to support climate investments, public transit, and clean energy standards, for example. The Natural Resources Defense Council has a guide to lobbying your legislator. Getting involved in communities doesn't just multiply your impact. It can also stave off despair. Ray has seen this in her classes at Humboldt State, in which she encourages students to build trust, express their feelings about climate change, and essentially practice for going out into the wider world. Quote, "The alleviation of anxiety that happens when you're working towards a common goal, even if it's a really depressing one, in community is actually very joyful and very fulfilling," end quote. Just as no one person can fix climate change, the crisis isn't going to be solved overnight, and it may not be solved in a conventional way at all. In order to confront this fact, people need to think of fighting climate change as a long-term process they engage with over time, Hegler said. We should see the problem, quote, "in the same realm that you would see reproductive justice or racial justice or any other justice issue," she explained. You would never say, "What's the one thing I can do about racism?" End quote. It's also important to remember that for many communities the world over, facing a major threat to the present and future is nothing new. Anti-colonial and abolitionist movements, quote, "have had long traditions of movement resilience that have a lot to teach the climate movement," Ray noted, including the message that climate change is not the first and only existential threat we've ever faced, end quote. Indeed, social movements from the opposition to apartheid in South Africa to indigenous rights activism here in the U.S. have, quote, "seen a lot of reason for despair and no evidence for hope and have still figured out how to fight the fight," Ray said. The fight against climate change can be slow, difficult, and painful. But in order to stay committed for the long haul, people need to think about the positive too, to actively discipline into your life the cultivation of joy, end quote. That could mean something as simple as reading news about environmental success stories or successful activism in your local community. Ray is involved in a local group with the Just Transition movement, which works toward an equitable shift away from fossil fuels and says, quote, "The newsletter that they send me is enough to keep me going. The world is awful, and there's so much beauty, joy, and delight to be had too," end quote. It's also okay to feel the awfulness of the world. After all, climate change for many Americans today means risk to themselves or loved ones, or destruction of their homes or places they've come to love. And part of acknowledging climate anxiety and grief, for people not yet personally affected by disasters, can be asking yourself, if I am hurting so much, what is happening to people who are less privileged? End quote. Kriti, a senior climate scientist at the Environmental Defense Fund, recently told the New York Times. People who have been involved in climate science or activism for years still feel sorrow, despair, or rage, Hegler said. In fact, quote, "I feel comforted by the fact I can still feel that way because it means I'm not desensitized. I never want to be that person who can look at the world burn and feel fine," end quote. But when climate grief or despair become overwhelming, the key is to reach out to others in your community. Quote, "You are not the only one feeling this way," Hegler said, adding that, "It benefits the fossil fuel industry when you think that way. So find the other people who are feeling it too," end quote.
And so if you're someone who's trying to help with the environment, I think the important thing for you is to don't listen to people that have a lot of negative things. The statistics are negative, I agree. But let's turn it around. Like I turned around the white oak story. We can focus on what the good side of it has to do with, the half empty glass of water, I guess. We just have to always have a positive attitude. Great Spirit is watching over us. We have our spirituality intact in the Native community. I worry about some people who don't have their spirituality and don't see that it's important. They call it religion. We don't call it religion. It's our everyday walk. We're connected. We're connected with the earth. We're connected with the spirit world. We're connected, and we pray and we ask for help. We humble ourselves. We have many of these qualities, of patience, tolerance, forgiveness, compassion, empathy, and humility. And so we work very hard to be a good person. And so I suggest, the climate justice people take a look at the Native Americans in their surround, in their communities in the world, and they learn from them and they take all the positive. So our spirituality is one example of why we're strong, because we pray to Great Spirit. And we restore our hope in our ceremonies. I go to Sundance, which is a 4-day Sundance ceremony. I go to Hamblecha, Vision Quest ceremony. It's a 4-day ceremony, and we pray. We pray, we conduct ceremonies, and we come away from that recharged. And so, people don't have a really strong understanding of our ceremonial life, but it does strengthen us. It strengthens our hope. And we take that hope and we go back into our communities and we give it away to other people. We encourage them, we support them, we're positive. We try to listen to them if they're troubled, So the strength we gain during our long ceremonies that we hold in our Native American communities of dance and song and all of this, we're using it for the purpose of being selfless servants to the rest of humanity, to our own families, to our own communities, and then also the world. So, our highest priorities is for our own families and our communities. And then we stretch out to the world as role models. But I think that climate justice people should always be careful who you listen to and make sure that it's uplifting, because you have a hard job. You have a hard job ahead of you, but it is fulfilling. If you're going to connect yourself to the earth and work with the spirits of the earth and the spirits of the sky, it's going to feed you. You're going to feel a sense of healing. If you're around a tree or a plant or an animal, you see a deer walking through the forest. I have a deer come through here every day. You get this sense of connection and you get this sense of peace surrounding you, descending upon you, making you feel, new strength, new life. And so I think it's very important for our climate justice people to surround themselves with their own spirituality. And I don't use the word religion, but I am also a Baha'i, which is one of the world religions. So, that belief is based on unity, harmony between all people. We're all one humankind, and we have very strong race policies, race reconciliation policies and practices. And so, I do believe in religion, but I speak about spirituality because it's a living spirituality. And I think that everybody could strive to learn more about it and to strengthen their own spirituality. Then they can do something to help the earth. And if things get harder, which they will be stronger. They will have galvanized their spirits. They will have more resiliency because, we find out that our tests and difficulties have actually made us stronger. Indians didn't go away. We didn't die. They expected we would. We didn't. But all of the hardship we suffered from simply made us stronger. And although they made our religion illegal in 1883, they were sending us to prison and murdering our medicine people and burning the bundles and pipes and all the sacred bundles, it didn't wipe us out. It didn't wipe our spirituality out. It made it harder to find it because the elders started being quiet. But we're now, since 1978, it's become legal again. So since 1978, you can't arrest me for going into the sweat lodge like you used to, or to going to Sundance. That's just 1978. It was illegal up until then. Can you believe that? But now that we're strengthening ourselves and going to our ceremonies and we're praying, and our spirituality's been getting stronger, our spiritual qualities of respect and honor, humility, compassion are getting stronger. It makes us a better human being. And so all the hardships, bring them on. They are coming. I've had the spirit of the wind talk to me. I was out in the backyard when I still lived in Portland, must have been 5 or 6 years ago. I wrote an article for Willamette Week that showed up 3 years ago there, and said, the wind is talking. Can you hear the wind? I don't know if it's still available online or not, but, I was out in the backyard at Wisdom Gardens and the wind talked to me. It said, the wind is talking. Can you hear the wind? And I couldn't believe that I heard that in the wind. And so a few days later, they confirmed to me that, that was the spirit of the wind talking to me. And that things have gotten to the point where, you notice the wind is a big contributing cause of the fires and the storms, the tornadoes. So we have to be connected with the spirit of the wind in order, number one, to protect ourselves, protect our land, protect our families. We have to be able to communicate with the wind. My late husband, he was a medicine man, like I said, and he would have ceremonies or he would pray if a storm was coming. And they had a lot of tornadoes in South Dakota. So his prayers were strong enough. He would smoke his pipe. He would fill his pipe and put it out there, and it would stop a tornado from coming and, wiping out a farm. Or there was one time they asked him to pray at this powwow because they had a whole weekend powwow in North Dakota at United Technical College in Bismarck. And so they were having their Labor Day powwow, and they came to him. He showed up at the powwow, and they said, Uncle Martin, a tornado's coming, and we're just having our powwow. Can you pray? So he went out toward the west and said his prayers, and it stopped the tornado from running over their powwow, and people were not hurt. But he told everybody, well, when this powwow's over, you better get the heck out of here because it's going to wipe the area out, And so as soon as that powwow was over, it came through pretty strong. But, this is the kind of connection we have with the spirit world, and people don't understand it, but it's our spirituality that has us connected with the earth. And so when we get messages from the wind or, an eagle or a tree, when we get messages, we need to listen. And we can actually turn for all of them for healing as well. So I suggest that the climate refugee people, I don't mean to call them refugees, but they may become refugees in the near future. Our whole planet, we may all become refugees. I was just watching the film on Ethiopia, which is their children are starving. People are dying right now out of because of the famine. It's a climate issue. And so I really want to tell the climate people, please stay strong. Do your work. Don't give up. Don't be discouraged. There's a lot of difficulties when people want to make a profit off of digging coal. And, we're going to have problems for years to come because of that profit motive. They either want the money or they don't want to lay off their people that are digging the coal, whatever. We are going to have some bad news. We can't seem to turn people around fast enough. We're trying to do as many energy, improvements as we can. But in the meantime, get ready, strengthen yourself. Rely on your spirituality, rely on your energy, your good energy, the positive energy. And so you have to really philosophize how it is. I don't think that shouting and yelling and putting your fist in the air is going to produce as many positive results as doing something positive. Even if it means that you're going to go out and just work in a field somewhere and remove the weeds and help to plant some corn. We just have to pick and choose how it is we're going to respond to the issues of the day. We have to really pray and reflect and use our best judgment and join a group whose philosophy we agree with. If you want to be angry, it's okay. You can go ahead and do that. I don't know whether it's healthy or not, though. I wouldn't recommend it. And I hate to confess, but I get angry at some of these people. I get very disappointed. They were not created to be that way. We were created to be selfless servants to humanity. We never think of ourselves first. We think of the others. We think of what's the better good for all. And so, it's a tough world we live in with a lot of competing philosophies, and we just have to pick carefully.
So food sovereignty is also a term that we're hearing more now. Could you share your understanding of how this concept connects to your work and how in the Elderberry Wisdom Farm newsletter, you shared information about the UN Food System Summit, how this is related to your work as well?
I wished I had that in front of me because it had the percentage of people that are, starving right now. But food justice and some food sovereignty. As Native people, we really talk about sovereignty a lot because we are sovereign nations. When you're on an Indian reservation, that's Indian reservations, politics, government, legal system, et cetera, is all Native. Outside of the reservation, it's different. But when you're on your own reservation, you're a sovereign nation. And people are increasingly realize that. They didn't used to include us when decisions were made by the government. And so they're beginning to include us now, which we're very grateful for. Our voice is being included. And so we're increasingly sharing with the world about food sovereignty. And we just simply realize that our health has deteriorated to such extent that many Native American people have heart disease and, kidney disorders, and they've got diabetes. They have a lot of health issues because we're eating the wrong food. And we believe in eating the food of our ancestors. Like I'm a caribou person. If I was home, I would be eating caribou, moose meat, and that kind of thing. I wouldn't be going to the store and getting beef or pork or chicken. I might have some ptarmigan. My little brothers might run out and shoot some ptarmigan, and we'd have some ptarmigan for bird, or shoot a duck or a geese flying overhead. But, food sovereignty just simply means that we have a right for self-determination among our own people, and we prefer our own foods because they're healthier. The dominant society's food has led to a lot of disease for us, and the despondency of people has created a lot of alcoholism and drug addictions. They get so darn depressed. We've had a lot of mental health issues over that and addictions issues that we're still trying to overcome, and that's hurt our health. And so I think when it comes to food sovereignty, Native people have a lot of views on how we're restoring the earth, how we're restoring the soil, how we're starting to plant our heirloom plant species. And frequently it was corn, beans, and squash. And we always had fish, but they're rapidly declining. I don't know what our people on the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers of Alaska are going to do without their salmon, because they lived on it. They lived all year on their salmon and their moose and their caribou, and it's getting harder. Some of the species are almost extinct. And so we're just hoping and praying we can turn that around. I think, if that gives people a pretty good idea of what food sovereignty is, it's just the deep concern that Native people have and how we're trying to turn around our lives by eating better and eating the foods that are of our ancestors that are healthier. There's hundreds of species of corn. And this corn you buy in the store, even the organic corn, it's all this super sweet hybridized corn. And we don't do hybridized stuff. We look for the old heirloom species that our ancestors, some of them come from farms that are dry crops, dry farming like the Hopi do. They've been, running out of water for a very long time. And their farms are dry farms. And so they can still manage to grow corn, beans, and squash using species that can grow with very little moisture. And so we have to be thinking smart with what it is we're eating and what it is that we're growing. And I just ask people, think twice before you support the hybridized ultra sweet corn industry. It just doesn't make sense. How much health is that giving you? I know, well, just eat some ice cream, if you want something sweet. But, if you're going to have good old healthy corn, find something that's healthy for you.
So what is the biggest struggle you've encountered and or the most useful lesson you've learned throughout your years within this work?
The biggest struggle, I think that, I was born in 1944, and here in another week or so, I'll be 77. During my lifetime, I saw a lot of abandonment syndrome and culture shock in my own personal life, because I was removed from Alaska, raised by the white side of the family, lost my culture. I wasn't even told that I was Indian. They just took me completely out of it because of the personal racism in the white side of the family down here. And I think that this is one example of the personal struggle that many Native people face, is losing their culture. Many, many thousands of children who went to Indian boarding schools were removed from their homes. It was the War Department that headed up the Bureau of Indian Affairs in those days. So the War Department was gathering up the kids, and they wanted to kill the Indian and save the child. And so the struggle that we're surviving from right now is overcoming that and restoring our hope that we can remember the stories, we can remember the history, we can remember the teachings, we can reconnect with the earth, we can learn, the Indigenous way of learning, which is, the learning model I use at Elderberry Wisdom Farm. I'm restoring a learning model that is compatible with the learning styles of Native people. And so each one of us, as we recover and begin to do something to serve our people, we step forward with something that is needed in the world. And for me, it's restoring education to be more Indigenous and restoring people's wisdom and knowledge to be more of who they are, so that they don't have to feel like a foreigner in their own skin. Many people have felt a deep sense of shame and guilt for being Native, when we should be really proud. And so most of my work has to do with health and wellness. It has to do with restoring the earth. It has to do with social and economic things, because I want our people to prosper. I want them to have prosperity in their families, so they don't need to say, well, are we going to feed our family this week? Does everybody get to eat tonight? Or do some of you have to wait till tomorrow to eat in order to pay rent or to pay my house mortgage? We don't have enough food for everybody. So we're living like that today. And I just think, we're doing everything we can to support one another. And the social and economic development that I'm doing right now is helping Native people to form their own micro enterprises in an agriculture or a horticulture. Horticulture meaning restoring native plant species, and also doing habitat restoration on local land. So we're developing a workforce crew to go out and do work up in the North Santiam watershed that burned out. They're asking our crew to come out there and do work on it. So we're providing living wage jobs. We're not providing like $7.80 an hour or whatever. We're trying to provide $15 an hour for our team to go out and restore the soil, plant, so that the land can restore itself again. And, that's my work, and that's what I do.
So how can people, especially settlers such as myself, support the Elderberry Wisdom Farm and the other programs that you've created?
Well, I just suggest they come to elderberrywisdom.org and sign up. Check out our website. And if you like what we're doing, sign up for the newsletter. And if you sign up for the newsletter, that means we'll automatically send you our newsletter every month. We only send things out about once a month. And so I think, you'll learn a lot from our newsletters. I speak from my heart when I do my newsletters. It's not a typical newsletter. It's personal, and I'm talking about each one of my projects, or I'm talking about one of our staff members, or talking about one of our projects. I'm also sharing information about issues. And right now we just started a end of the year fundraising drive. So we're very small, and we need the financial support of people as well. So some people do have enough resources that they can make an end of the year donation. And so every October, November, and December, we kind of open it up for people to make donations. And we're just trying to raise $3,000 this year. We've raised $1,000 in October. We hope to raise $1,000 in November and $1,000 in December, and we'll have a little bit more toward the projects we do. So I think, if someone's in that position, we don't like to ask for money, but it really does help to keep our people salaried. We're trying to raise their salaries right now so that it's a living wage. We're trying to make it industry standard so we don't lose very valuable staff. We have extremely valuable staff members working with me. They're always getting invited to work with somebody else, and for much more pay, because I don't have a lot of funding to pay them. It's real easy to lose our people. We think it's valuable, if you want to make a donation to us. But I think what's most important is that you have an understanding of our philosophy and the stories we like to share online, and some of the videos that we have up tell some stories. So
if you're interested in learning more about Indigenous water and land protection, this episode's recommended book is To Be a Water Protector by Winona LaDuke. The link to purchase this book can be found in the episode description, or check it out and support your local library. Thanks again to Rose Highbear for speaking with me. This has been Voices in Action, a podcast brought to you by EOSIL. Stay informed, stay safe, and remember, the fight to save our planet isn't over yet.